As Donald Trump openly employs Nazi rhetoric at public rallies and on social media, Republican Party leaders refuse to condemn him, and elements of the media seem utterly indifferent. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. All right, folks, I've got some clips to play here. And again, I just got to begin with this disclaimer. I know some of you are not interested in the latest crazy thing that Trump has to say, but I believe that we are morally and politically obligated to cover it because it's getting increasingly worse. This is a clip from over the weekend or near the weekend during Veterans Day. And note the language that Donald Trump uses to describe his political opponents because it's fashy as hell.
Today, especially in honor of our great veterans on Veterans Day, we pledge to you that we will root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country, that lie and steal and cheat on elections and will do anything possible. They'll do anything, whether legally or illegally, to destroy America and to destroy the American dream. The real threat is not from the radical right. The real threat is from the radical left, and it's growing every day, every single day. The threat from outside forces is far less sinister, dangerous, and grave than the threat from within. Our threat is from within, because if you have a capable, competent, smart, tough leader, Russia, China, North Korea, they're not going to want to play with us. And they didn't. Despite the hatred and anger of the radical left lunatics who want to destroy our country, we will make America great again.
All right, so again, that rhetoric, as we're about to discuss, is just lifted straight from the pages of Nazi propaganda and the reels of Nazi propaganda. He repeated basically that phrase verbatim, or that entire passage verbatim, essential. Folks, incredibly deranged. Now, I want to point out, before we get into, again, how this rhetoric is indeed openly Nazi, even if we grant Trump's premise, which is that the far left is a greater threat than the far right, which is simply not true. By any objective measure, the far right is more dangerous in the United States by far than the far left. But even though that's the case, that the far right is far more dangerous than the far left, President Biden and Democrats don't use this kind of language to describe the far right, even at their most vociferous, right? President Biden may say that MAGA Republicans are extreme, but he's never even suggested that they're vermin who need to be rooted out and hunted down. Trump says stuff like this and is openly celebrated for it. It's absolutely despicable. Imagine how they would react, and imagine how most people would react if Democrats or the left referred to 50% of the country as vermin that need to be rooted out. It's absolutely disgraceful. Now, again, in terms of the rhetoric being openly from Nazi propaganda and Nazi writings, take it from authoritarianism experts and political scientists who have studied this intimately. This is what they have to say on the matter.
Start with Trump's use of the word vermin. Am I wrong to make the historical comparison to anti-Semitic propaganda during the Nazi years?
No, I mean, this is straight. It doesn't echo Mein Kampf. This is, textbook Mein Kampf, except for the explicit mentioning of Jews as behind the left. Any anti-Semite will hear this vocabulary as directed against Jews. But Hitler himself was an anti-Semite. He took it that Jews were behind the international left, Marxism, communism, but his real target was democracy. And anyone who was pro-democracy or labor union, trade unionists, he labeled as Marxists. So this overbroad use of Marxist to target basically any political opponent, this is familiar from fascism and the way you attack democracy. And of course, labeling your political opponents vermin. The Nazis targeted their political opponents. They targeted for incarceration in concentration camps. They targeted suspected communists, socialists as internal enemies. So this is right out of Mein Kampf.
Again, there you have it. If you look back, and Twitter is being littered with examples, there are multiple op-eds and articles about this going into vivid detail from historians about the echoes and the parallels between Nazi rhetoric in the 30s and 40s and Trump's rhetoric and MAGA's rhetoric here. It's becoming increasingly unhinged. I'll also point out that Professor Stanley there makes a really good point, which is that Republicans and MAGA and Trump in particular have this habit and have had this habit for some time of just painting anybody who disagrees with them as a communist Marxist. And again, it's not just exclusive to Trump doing it. We have people like Marsha Blackburn, the Republican senator from Tennessee, Republican elected officials all the time do this. They call President Biden a Marxist. Joe freaking Biden apparently is a Marxist to them. That's what I'm saying, where you can't give them the benefit of the doubt. Even if they were just inappropriately referring to a small subset of the far left, it would still be inappropriate. It would still be despicable then. But they're not referring to just a small segment of the far left. They're referring to all of us. Anybody who criticizes them, no matter where you are a communist Marxist to the leadership of the Republican Party. And that adds another dimension to how despicable Trump's rhetoric is. Now, when asked about Trump's rhetoric, Ronna McDaniel, who is the chairwoman of the Republican National Committee, she's in charge of, again, basically getting Republicans elected and reelected. She controls the purse strings of the campaign. She's asked about this, and note her cowardly response.
He says, quote, "In honor of our great veterans on Veterans Day, we pledge to you that we will root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country, lie, steal, and cheat on elections, and will do anything possible, whether legally or illegally, to destroy America." Are you comfortable with this language coming from the GOP frontrunner?
Again, I am not going to comment on candidates and their campaign messaging. I will say this. I know President Trump supports the veterans. Our whole party supports our veterans. And I do think we're at a very serious moment in our.
There you go. Imagine again, and this is something that needs to be pointed out to every Republican we possibly can. Imagine if a Democratic candidate, imagine if President Biden said the things that Trump said, but he said them about Republicans, which he's never said anything like that in terms of Republicans. But let's say that that did happen. And then imagine you had the Democratic equivalent of Ronna McDaniel, if you have somebody who's controlling the purse strings, getting Democrats elected, and they're asked about a Democrat's rhetoric. Imagine if a Democrat responded in that way. I'm just not going to respond. I'm not going to get into the campaigns and the comments and the rhetoric. It would be widely condemned, not just by the right, but also by the center, and even much of us on the left, as being absolutely a cowardly response, right? But Republicans are graded on a curve. It's absolutely disgraceful. Now, there was this Washington Post op-ed discussing Trump's rhetoric. Ruth Ben-Ghiat, a historian at New York University, said in an email to the Washington Post, calling people vermin was used effectively by Hitler and Mussolini to dehumanize people and encourage their followers to engage in violence. Okay? Literally, the very next paragraph, Stephen Chung, a Trump campaign spokesman, told the Washington Post that those who try to make that ridiculous assertion are clearly snowflakes grasping for anything because they're suffering from Trump derangement syndrome, and their entire existence will be crushed when President Trump returns to the White House. So as I say on Twitter, sane people say, hey, MAGA, you and your leader are using dehumanizing and violent rhetoric. MAGA, no, we're not, and your entire existence shall be crushed the moment dear leader is restored to power. Praise be unto the great orange. You see the irony is overwhelming. They're simultaneously saying, no, of course we're not using dehumanizing rhetoric. That's absolutely insane, but your entire existence will be crushed as soon as we get absolute power. It's insane. It's just madness. Again, it almost makes you wonder, like, if they're trolling, but they don't seem to have much of a sense of self-awareness, so it's entirely possible that Trump supporters literally don't realize that they just contradicted themselves in the span of 2 sentences. But again, it goes beyond rhetoric. Trump is actively signaling in terms of his dangerous plans. We've talked about Project 2025. We're probably going to do a more formal video about it in the next couple of weeks because it merits like a formal response. But Axios just dropped a new article talking about how Trump's plans to accrue executive power are starting to manifest themselves in specific policy areas. So in one specific example, with respect to immigration, so the next priority will be the Department of Homeland Security, according to reporting, and the border, with Trump plans to erect sprawling detention camps, scour the country for unauthorized immigrants, and deport people by the millions per year. We're told Trump's top criterion for immigration officials will be whoever promises to be most aggressive. Trump has told allies that he's confident the Supreme Court will back his most draconian moves. So again, there you have it. It'd be bad enough if someone that powerful and that deranged were saying things this deranged, but he's putting pen to paper to execute it in official policy should he be reelected. And then you add on top of all of that how the press is responding. Now, we have some examples of the media responding responsibly. So you have the Washington Post saying, Trump calls political enemies vermin, echoing dictators Hitler and Mussolini. That's responsible and accurate. Forbes is doing the same thing. Trump compares political foes to vermin on Veterans Day, echoing Nazi propaganda. Again, that's factually accurate and morally responsible. And then you have the New Republic, which is it's one of my favorite publications. It's relatively progressive. Okay, so you expect this out of them for them to hit Republicans as hard as they do. It's official. With vermin, Trump is now using straight up Nazi talk. But then you get to the New York frickin' Times, which everyone says has a liberal left-leaning bias. They had the most milquetoast response. Trump takes Veterans Day speech in a very different direction. Really? Really? Sure, it's intriguing, but I mean, not, number one, not particularly accurate and certainly not morally responsible. And people have been condemning the New York Times for this headline, as well they should. But then you got a guy from Politico, one of the senior columnists of Politico, right? He responds like this: not only a do better, but also a ye ol' headline choices will wake voters up to who Trump is. Peak Twitter scolding. So he's like rejecting the idea that the media has an obligation to phrase things accurately. This is the problem, right? So his argument is everybody knows who Trump is. So we're not obligated when Trump, a powerful politician who may yet be the president of the United States, who is openly employing Nazi propaganda, we actually don't have to report it that way. We can kind of sanitize it and downplay it and just kind of sweep it under the rug because everybody already knows who Trump is. Maybe. But I'm a firm believer, and they should know this too, because they're in journalism for a reason. The power of the written word, the power of the spoken word, at certain times delivered by certain people in certain contexts, does have the power to move mountains and change hearts. You can tell a person a fact 9 times out of 10, and they won't recognize it. But if you catch them at the right time, at the right place, with the right combination of words, that 10th time out of 10 can change their minds. It's what persuasive rhetoric does all the time. So this idea that everybody has their minds made up on Trump and we have no obligation to talk about the terrible stuff that he does and present it that way is insane, and it's irresponsible. So yeah, Donald Trump is again finding new creative ways to become a full-blown fascist and to broadcast it to the rest of the world. And the media, many elements of the media are doing the right thing. But then you have these holdouts who are like, who cares? Let me know what you think in the comments, because I think this is incredibly dangerous.